Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for coming today. Welcome to the Atheist Society on the 9th of May, 2024. I just had a moment's thought about the date, the 9th of May. It's the anniversary of the first opening of the federal parliament. So Australia has a national day, but if people wanted to find an alternative date for the national day, 9th of May could be one, because Australia came into being through an act of democracy. They voted to become a country, and the opening of federal parliament was on the 9th of May. So, yay, 9th of May. Now, I want to welcome Allan today, and he's going to give a presentation on the Freedom of Thought Australia report. Over to you, Les.
Thanks very much, John. Thanks for the introduction, and thank you everyone for coming. I think we've got some people on Zoom as well. So let me start. All right. So tonight I'll be speaking for about 45 minutes, and while I'm speaking, if you've got a short question or a very short comment, please bring it on, especially a question of clarification. And then if we can leave the major part of the discussion and the bigger questions about when I finish. So for those who don't know me, I sit on the board of Humanist Australia, and I run the Philosophy Matters meetup group, and I also run the Ex-Religious Support Network, which is now again a community, an official community of Humanist Australia. So what tonight's about, each year Humanist International compiles its Freedom of Thought report, examining systemic and legal discrimination against the globe, across the globe, against humanists, atheists and the non-religious. After presenting a brief overview of the recently released 2023 report, I'll explore the key findings for Australia. Although Australia has a proud history of separation of church and state, the report highlights some continuing areas of concern: government, education and freedom of expression. And then I'll encourage you all to ask questions and share your views on the report's findings after that. Okay, so what's the relation between Humanist Australia and the Freedom of Thought report? Humanist Australia is a member organisation of Humanist International, and together we advocate for a more tolerant and benevolent society in which all, regardless of their religious belief or non-belief, and that's the important addition there, can reach their full potential. Rewarding and satisfying lives are only achievable when each of us can follow our conscience and our passions, free from bigotry, persecution and discrimination on the basis of belief and non-belief. For every Freedom of Thought report, Humanist International invites Humanist Australia to assist with providing information about the current situation in Australia. And I'm pleased to see in the, so I'll be talking about the Freedom of Thought report that was released at the end of last year. I'm pleased to see in the inset where it says, special thanks to the following Humanist International member organisations, and we are listed there, Humanist Australia, listed with Humanist Association of Toronto, the ones in Zambia, Humanist Canada, Humanist Iceland, and a number of others. So what I'll be dealing with tonight, these 5 key things. What is Humanist Australia? What is the Freedom of Thought report? What are the key findings of the report? And what does the report say in particular about Australia? So first, what is Humanist International, who do the report annually? So let me start by quoting from what they say, who they are in the Freedom of Thought report, the Key Countries edition. They say Humanist International is the global representative democratic body of the humanist movement, which unites a diversity of humanist and other non-religious organisations and individuals. We want everyone to live a life of dignity in a world where universal human rights are respected and protected, including adherence to political secularism by all states. We work to build, support, and represent the global humanist movement by defending human rights, particularly those pertaining to non-religious people, and promoting humanist values worldwide as exemplified in the Amsterdam Declaration of 2002. And I think that's the one that was just recently updated for 2022. Okay, so a bit more. Humanist International was founded in Amsterdam in 1952, started off as the International Humanist and Ethical Union, the IHEU. And many of the humanist secularist organisations, well, not many, some of them had the word ethical in them. And over the last several decades now, they've been dropping the term ethical. So gone over to Humanist International. And it changed its name to Humanist International in 2019. Humanist International is the umbrella organisation for 160 organisations around the world in over 80 countries. It maintains a delegation to the United Nations Human Rights Council and to the United Nations directly and to the Council of Europe. What's the purpose of Humanist International compiling this annual Freedom of Thought report? And the objectives. First, it's researched and published on an annual basis, and it reports on the systemic and legal discrimination against the non-religious. Now, that includes atheists, humanists, agnostics, secularists, freethinkers, skeptics, so a whole grab bag of people who are non-religious. Now, focuses on restrictions in these three key areas: freedom of thought, conscience, religion or belief, freedom of expression, and freedom of assembly and association. Now, the key countries edition, which comes out every year as a supplement, it updates in detail 10 countries. So I think it reports on many countries, maybe I think 160 or thereabouts. They can't do a detailed update on every country every year. They just don't have the resources. So they just focus on 10 countries. For the one last year, Australia was included in that detailed update. So I think that's why it's pertinent to talk about this particular annual update. It's important to note that the stick that Humanist International use to beat nations over the head with for not protecting the rights, privileges, freedoms of atheists, secularists, humanists is the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. And there's three key articles in the declaration that is particularly pertinent, and I want to point these out. So the first one is Article 18 of the UDHR. It says everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion. This right includes freedom to change his religion or belief, and freedom either alone or in community with others and in public or private to manifest his or her religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship and observance. The next article, Article 19, is about freedom of opinion and expression. Everyone has the right to freedom of opinion and expression. This right includes freedom to hold opinions without interference and to seek, receive and impart information and ideas through any media and regardless of frontiers. And the next one, Article 20, so they occur in this series 18, 19 and 20 because they're on this allied theme. So this one is about everyone has the right to freedom of peaceful assembly and association. And secondly, no one may be compelled to belong to an association, including religious associations. So in the three articles, what I want to stress here is, I think it was the last talk I did here on what grounds human rights, and I was arguing that consequentialism or utilitarianism in particular grounds human rights. And I know a lot of, well, not a lot, some atheists poo-poo the idea of human rights, thinking it's mumbo jumbo talk, but the human rights talk is really an ally of ours. That is the agreed rights that most nations in the world sign up to. And actually, the 1968 ICCPR, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, is the legal instrument that allows the enforcement of these rights I'm talking about now on member countries. So human rights are the ally of atheists, agnostics, secularists, and a good example of how it is an ally and how it can be used is this Humanist International annual report that gives us the scorecard of how each nation is going. Okay, so first I'll talk about the general global findings, and then I'll move on to Australia with the particular findings. Most of the stuff I'm talking about tonight is in the key countries edition. I'll give the references later, but you can read all the assessments for all of the countries online, and you can download this key countries edition, which looks at particular countries in detail. This is the update. So what are the basic findings globally? Overwhelmingly, the majority of countries, this is the real worry, isn't it? Overwhelmingly, the majority of countries fail to respect the rights of humanists, atheists, and the non-religious. Now, these references here are to the key countries edition. In over 10 countries, apostasy, that is changing your religion or leaving your religion, is punishable by death. In many countries, blasphemy laws outlaw criticism of protected religions, religious beliefs, religious figures, and religious institutions. Some countries bar atheists even from marrying and even removing parental rights. Some countries also ban the non-religious, atheists, agnostics, secularists, humanists, they bar them from public office and they privilege state religion. So if you're a member of the privileged religion, you get extra privileges like we do in Australia. You get tax breaks and you don't have to subscribe to all the governance requirements if you're a religious institution. Now, this year, there's a watch list. These are the countries that are particularly watched for grievous abuses. This is the entire list: Afghanistan, Greece, India, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Sri Lanka, Sudan, and Uganda. I think Greece is Christian, and the problem with Greece is the suppression of the Macedonian community. So there's a Christian country. India is predominantly Hindu. The others, Uganda, there's a lot of persecution by Christians. I think the Anglican Church and the evangelicals have made good roads in Uganda, and they're persecuting gay people. So that's Christian persecution of gay people. And I think the others, as you say, Raffaella, they are Muslim.
Sri Lanka is Buddhist.
Sri Lanka. Oh, thank you. Thank you, David. That's David Cohen. The Humanist International grade each country in 4 areas: constitution and government, education and children's rights, family, community, society, religious courts and tribunals, and the last one, freedom of expression, advocacy of humanist values. And in each of those areas, they rate each country with a score of 1 to 5. And the worst is grave violations. Next worst is severe discrimination, systemic discrimination, then mostly satisfactory, free and equal. And what they do is they provide a global chart like this, each of those 4 dimensions. Now, what I'm showing you here is the composite chart with all of those 4 dimensions bundled together. And you can see the darker the color, the more egregious and severe the restrictions and persecutions and discriminations against atheists and other secular people. So just looking at it, I mean, this is what's so great about these color charts. You can see at a glance where the real problem areas are: Asia, Middle East, northern countries in Africa, middle countries in Africa, and a little bit in South America. So that's a snapshot. Okay, so that's the very brief summary of the global situation. So now honing in onto Australia, the key countries edition does pick out some things that are working well in Australia, and I've noted them here. So first is that we do have constitutional protection of religion and no religious belief and practice with section 616 of the federal constitution. Now that's only with federal law. It restricts federal law, and from memory it's only Tasmania that has this constitutional protection in its state constitution. The other states don't have it. Okay, what else is working well is that there are federal laws protecting freedom of religion and belief. The other good thing is most states have decriminalised abortion, and all states have legalised voluntary assisted dying. And now the territory, Australian Capital Territory, I think that now has enshrined legislation. The only territory of the two territories that doesn't have voluntary assisted dying legislation yet is the Northern Territory. And the last thing is there are protections for freedom of expression and association and protections for a free press. So that's what's working well. The primary concerns that come out of the report are these. There is no federal human rights charter like there is in a number of other countries, but the good thing is that we do subscribe to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and the legal instrument, the ICCPR, International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. So we have signed those. Some public ceremonies are still Christian. The concern religious institutions are exempt from tax and compliance. And I think we'll see later there's been some pushback from that of late. Next, religious instruction in public schools is still done and done by unqualified volunteers. Next, National School Chaplaincy Program is discriminatory, and I'll have more to say on that. Next, private religious schools receive most of the public funding. I mean, there's funding of sectarianism, funding of the separation of our kids into classification of whether your parents belong to this religion or that religion. I mean, it's crazy we're still doing this stuff. 3 states target climate and non-violent protesters. If I don't mention that later, that's Western Australia and Victoria. Some states still outlaw blasphemy, and I'll have a little bit more to say about that later. And state religious vilification laws may restrict criticism of religion. So that's the primary concerns. So now moving into a bit more of the detail, and I'll be reading parts, just excerpts from the key countries edition. So remember there's 4 areas that the Humanist International look at. And the first area is the Constitution and government. And I've pulled out this excerpt from the report. Although the government is officially secular, it continues to favour Christianity for many public ceremonies. For example, each session of Parliament begins with a joint recitation of the Lord's Prayer. Various groups campaign against that practice and have had successes at a local government level, giving some cause for optimism in the state of Victoria. Religious institutions in general also enjoy long-standing privileges in being exempt from paying tax and from complying with laws such as the Victorian Equal Opportunity Act against discrimination and Australian Charities and Not-for-Profits Commission Act for transparent government. The key areas there: not paying their share of tax and not having to submit the stringent financial statements that non-religious organisations have to. And I know Fiona Patten had started campaigning for getting rid of parliamentary prayers in the state parliament, but unfortunately, that state Victorian parliament, but unfortunately, she didn't get re-elected to the Senate at the last election. So we've lost a great warrior there. So on the issue of prayers, I went to the Secularism Australia conference held in December last year, and it was great. It just went over one day. Hopefully next time they run it, it will go over 2 days because it was certainly packed quite densely. And here's Victor Franco, who's a councillor for the city of Borondura, who'd been working. I know some of you have met him, you've heard him speak. He's been at this for maybe 3 years, a long, hard battle. He got a lot of pushback, especially from fellow councillors. He reported at the conference what proportion of councils currently have, this is local councils have prayers. And if you can't read it, let me just read out the figures. Local councils per state who still have a religious prayer. New South Wales, 56%, Victoria, 53%, Queensland, 45%, Western Australia, 8%. Hooray, Western Australia. What are they doing right? South Australia, 33%, Tasmania, 27%. So out of all the councils nationally, local councils nationally, overall it's 37%, 37% still open with a Christian prayer in a supposedly secular country with separation of church and state. We are making inroads. The proportions are going down because councils are changing one by one. So still on constitution and government in that area, so quoting from the report again, in 2019, a religious discrimination bill was proposed that would prohibit discrimination in certain areas of public life on the ground of religious belief or activity, end of quote. Many groups, including anti-discrimination commissions throughout the country, opposed it, while the coalition government set out to develop a second version that too was strongly opposed. And despite passing with amendments in the lower house, it was never brought to the Senate for debate for the 2022 election, changed the government. Now, the Morrison government at the time, they realised that coming up to an election, of course, this was far too much of a hot potato. They weren't going to win any votes, and they'd certainly lose quite a few votes. The new Australian Labor Party government that won that election has said it will prepare a revised bill that removes some of the contentious areas where state-based anti-discrimination laws were overridden. Now, it's been more than a year since. I don't think the ALP, Australian Labor Party, is doing anything in that regard. Has anyone seen any news about them working on a new version of the bill?
Yes, they were working on a new version.
Oh, are they, Andrew?
And about a month ago, they approached the opposition for bipartisan support. And based on the response, they said, we're not going ahead with it.
Oh, that's right. It was well in the news. And the Liberal National Party coalition were saying, since when do you have to wait for bipartisan report to introduce a bill? Let's, bring it on. Right. So because they didn't get the support from the Liberal Party, the ALP now has dropped it like a hot potato. Oh, no movement in that regard. But I mean, this is really important because one of the major contentions is, like in the United States, can a Christian bakery refuse to make a wedding cake for a gay couple? Here in Australia, if you're a teacher, can you be sacked because you're cohabitating without your partner? If you're a student, can you be expelled for being gay? These go to fundamental questions about very fundamental human rights. So we really need to have this settled. So moving on to the next area, education and children's rights. This is what the report, the Key Countries edition, had to say. The state governments permit religious education in public schools, generally taught by volunteers using approved curricula to varying degrees. Public schools in New South Wales provide secular ethics classes as an alternative for students who do not attend religious instruction classes. In other states, there is no secular alternative to religious education, but non-religious students may opt out of the class. So just on that, a couple of kind of big wins in Victoria. Firstly, the lobbying groups here finally forced the government to have, if your child goes to religious instruction in class time, when it was in class time, you actually had to opt your student in, because the default was, if you the parent don't say anything, by default your kid's going into a religious instruction class. Now these aren't religious instruction classes that are impartial to religions, teach each religions and their history and doctrines equally. No, these literally still are Christian propaganda classes. And that's why we're concerned that they're taught by volunteers. And when you look at the talks that the religious institutions give behind closed doors, they talk about the schools as fields for bringing children to Christ, and with the chaplaincy program as well, which we'll get to. The other big win was in Victoria. They've eventually got religious instruction done by these propagandizing volunteers, moved it out of class time and moved it into after school and lunchtime. So to continue on, what it says in the report, both the Australian federal government and state and territory governments provide funding for private schools, the great majority of which are faith-based. Catholic schools are reported to receive up to 75% of their funding from government schools. That's how our taxes are being used. So continuing on with education and children's rights, another piece in the report says this about the chaplaincy program. In 2023, the federal government expanded its former national school chaplaincy program, which provided financial support for government and non-government school communities to conduct chaplaincy services. The current incarnation of the program, renamed the National Student Wellbeing Program, no longer requires chaplains to be religious. The program emphasises that wellbeing officers and chaplains must not proselytise and must, quote, respect, accept and be sensitive to other views, values and beliefs, end of quote. Nevertheless, provision of chaplains is mostly managed through contracts with religiously dominated organisations who appear to prefer religious candidates. And this was a bit of a win, because we had a VCAT case here in Australia. Juliet, wife of Joe Seehey, Juliet was the plaintiff in the case. She wanted to be one of these chaplains in one of these schools. She wasn't allowed to be, because these third-party organisations that act as the intermediary between the individual chaplain who wants a job in a school and the school, they go through this third-party organisation for vetting, and these third-party organisations are predominantly Christian, and they have Christian selection criteria, and this is against it's against our own anti-discrimination legislation, and of course it's against the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights. So we had the VCAT case. The member in the VCAT case ruled that these third-party organisations, the contracting organisations, were acting unlawfully against the Anti-Discrimination Act. And then what happened? The head, we know the head of one of these schools that does most of the employing of the contractors. He said, we're going to go on as usual. We're going to keep having this selection criteria. So it means taking another case, the VCAT, which no one has done yet. So it was a technical win, but in practice, nothing has changed. Now, at the Secularism Australian conference again last year, Ron Williams spoke about, one thing he mentioned was how much money has been spent and has been projected to spend on this national chaplaincy program. Ron Williams, who's the Managing Director of Secular Public Education. Some of you may have met him or know him. He was also, I don't know whether he still is president of the Queensland Humanist Society, and one year he got the Australian Humanist of the Year award. He tallied it all up. In case you can't read figures, when it started with Howard spent $160 million on the program, Rudd 50 million, Gillard 222 million, Abbott 244 million, Turnbull 245 million, and then Morrison in 4 tranches of 61.4 million each. And then Albanese, this is current spend and projection into the future. Now, I can't remember whether it's for the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, I can't remember, but projecting into the future as well, 307 million, totaling 1.47 billion. Nearly $1.5 billion on this program, on this sectarian program. And this is what we've found in secret communications, in talks behind closed doors, in their documents. The people who are in these, employing these chaplains, they say that these schools are mission fields for bringing people to Christ. Okay, so on to the next area that the Humanists International look at when they grade countries. For Australia, in this area of family, community and society, they say an analysis of the 2016 census data and other academic surveys suggests that religious belief is on the decline in Australia, with 62% of the population reporting they do not belong to a religious organisation. 71% of Australians indicated that religion was not personally important. I'm quite astounded, well, in one way I'm astounded by that figure, by how big it is, but in another way, I'm not astounded because I talk to a lot of people, and how many people do you know who religion is an important factor in their life? A further 80% of marriages are now conducted in civil ceremonies. I've just pulled out there in the box the results from the last 2021 Australian census. 43.9% said they're Christian, 10% said they were of some other religion, and 38.7% said they had no religion or secular beliefs. Now, that 38.7% is bigger than the Catholics and the Protestants, the Catholics and the Anglicans combined. Michael Dove has been working very hard with others to get the question changed in the next Australian census because it's presumptive. The question is, what religion are you? When it should be the first question is, are you religious? And then if yes, what religion are you? Now, got a good win there because Michael tells me that the ABS is now trialling a new form of the question and possibly other questions as well, or other aspects of that question. I think we're getting there. And actually, if we get that, I think that'll knock out a lot of the cultural Christians and cultural Jews and cultural Hindus and cultural Muslims. And I'm expecting quite a jump from the last 38.7%. I mean, we know there's been a rapid decline in religious affiliation, especially from the 1950s, when women started entering the workforce, education levels improved, material prosperity improved after the war. So in the Western liberal democracies, I think we can only go one way, although I take that back because look at America. They are the outlier. They are the kook. So moving on to the next area, and I think this is the last area in the report, freedom of expression, humanist values. So quoting from the report, as in many parts of the world, the polarisation and claims of discrimination or being silenced have increased on both sides of several topics. For instance, there was strong debate about the right of a high-profile sports person to publicly declare that homosexuals, among others, are bound for hell. The others were divorcees, atheists, and 3 or 4 others. If you belong to any of those categories, you're going to hell. The person's contract was cancelled and a court case ensued where they claimed religious discrimination as the statement was part of their religious belief. The case was settled before trial, unfortunately, avoiding the setting of a legal precedent. And that case was, I'm sure most of you will remember, was the Israel Folau case, and he took the Rugby Australia to court and they settled out of court. He was suing for 14 million Australian. So that's still an issue that hasn't been properly resolved because we haven't got the new religious discrimination and religious freedom legislation. So continuing on with freedom of expression and freedom for humanists and atheists, consequently, the common law offences of blasphemy and blasphemous libel may yet exist in New South Wales, Victoria, South Australia, and the Northern Territory, and the common law offence of blasphemy in the Capital Territory. Code offences of blasphemy and blasphemous libel exist in Tasmania. And it devotes, in the report, it devotes 1 or 2 paragraphs to that, and it goes through state by state how these codes are vestiges from when we first became a nation. They go back to that time and they haven't been properly swept away. And they haven't been tested because here in Australia, unlike Pakistan and unlike India, it's not a common occurrence that people are taken to court for blasphemy. So it hasn't been tested. So continuing on in that area, the federal government and several states have passed laws outlawing racial vilification. And the states of Tasmania, Queensland and Victoria have extended those laws to also outlaw religious vilification. There is debate about the extent to which these laws only prescribe incitement to hatred or whether they may be used to suppress non-inciting speech about religious beliefs and practices. So, I mean, this is the really next issue because you want to outlaw hate speech, but you don't want to stifle genuine public debate and criticism. And, you know, one of the contentious issues is ridicule. I mean, I think everyone here would think that ridiculing a religion ought to be legally acceptable. But this is the question. What's that?
They're so ridiculous, they should be ridiculed.
Well, we think so. We think so. And yet some people's religious sensitivities are so sensitive. Oh, no, don't criticize me. You're harming me. I mean, that's what it comes down to. They're arguing that it's a special kind of psychological harm because they're being ridiculed. So this is still quite a contentious issue here. So in finishing up, the questions I've got that I invite you to think about is which of the report findings on Australia concern you the most? And also thinking historically, we're in a reasonably good place. And actually, let me just tell you what the summary scores are for Australia in those 4 categories. Okay, so the 4 categories. First one, Constitution and Government. We get a grade, we're in the middle grade. So there's 5 grades: grave violations, severe discrimination, systemic discrimination, mostly satisfactory, and the best is free and equal. We've got a middle grade for that, systemic discrimination in Constitution and Government. In education and children's rights, we also get a systemic discrimination score. In family, community, society, religious courts and tribunals, we get a free and equal. Good on you, Aussie. And for freedom of expression, advocacy of humanist values, we get, once again, systemic discrimination. So 3 out of the 4 areas were highlighted as systemic discrimination. I mean, that is worrying for a supposedly secular country with a separation of church and state. So that's where we're at now. So the question I have is, how do you think we got to where we are now? We were instituted as a secular country when we became a nation with separation of church and state. Have we got better? Oh, so that's my next question. Is Australia getting better or worse from federation? And then the last question is, what can we, all of us, including each of you, do about the situation we are in? So thank you for listening, and let's open it up for questions and discussion. Here's the references. If you want me to send you the slides, just email me. So the reference to the census, the online freedom of thought report, second one, third one is the downloadable PDF countries edition. And the last one is the link to the Secularism Australia Conference website. And if you want to contact me, there's my email address, best on admin@rationalrealm.com.
Thank you very much, Les. Before we go to questions, I'd just like to make a few announcements. First of all, we were very grateful to the Unitarians for the use of their hall. And if you happen to have any spare coins or cash, a receptacle to pass around. And while we're organising that, there's a few other announcements, the usual ones about other events taking place. I'm not sure what the dates are for the humanist lectures these days, but there's humanist lectures and there's Skeptics Society lectures towards the end of the month. Third Thursday, Humanist Victoria. Skeptics is on possibly the third Monday. As well as that, I'd like to mention the Friday events. We've got our Atheist pub night, the first Friday of the month, and that's at the Elsternwick Hotel. And also Humanist, third Friday of the month, also at Elsternwick Hotel. And they're just purely social events where we come and have a chat and have a meal, have a drink. Now, some other announcements. I got a message from Kat Parker. I don't know if she managed to join the Zoom.
Yep, anyway, I'm here.
Oh, Kat, would you like to say something about what you proposed?
My name's Kat Parker, and I'm one of the case managers for Secular Rescue at Centre for Inquiry, and we are looking for Australian citizens who are interested in helping Afghan atheists apply for humanitarian visas to Australia. On the call at the moment, we also, I think, Usman al-Hasba is on the call, and he is specifically, him and his family, they have escaped Afghanistan and they are have been in Pakistan for the last few years, and I'm trying to find a proposer for them. He was
Hello, hello everyone. Yes, I am here.
Hello. Could you very quickly tell everyone about your situation, that how you need to get out of Pakistan and not be returned to Afghanistan?
Sorry, ma'am. My English is weak.
Okay.
You know my situation.
Okay, I will explain it a little very carefully. Usmanullah is a member of a group called Afghan Change, and they have been working towards peace in Afghanistan and promoting equality, critical thinking, science education, and a secular society. And the Taliban are not very happy about this, and there are members of Afghan Change who have been killed already. Many of the members have moved to different countries around the world and gained asylum, but we still haven't managed to get Usmanullah and his family, which is his wife and 2 children, to safety yet. So if there's anyone out there that's interested in helping, we just need a proposer, and Secular Rescue will take care of the rest of everything else, flights and everything. So if you could help, please email me on kparker, that's KPARKER, at secular-rescue.org.
Okay, thanks, Kat. If you didn't get that email, you can email it to me with my email's on the website, and I'll forward that. So what we need is someone to act as a proposer, which doesn't involve that much. It just means you have to sign a document providing support, and it's an easy thing to do. So anyone that feels that they can do that, it would be great. One other thing I've got to announce, as you might know, when Michael Sherlock was giving his lecture, he mentioned Atheist Alliance International, and they need at the moment a delegate for Australia to join their committee. So if anyone is interested to assist with becoming more involved with Atheist Alliance International, also please let me know through my contact details, which are on the website, or I think you can find me somehow. Okay, that's it. I think we'll hand back to questions. I might fire off with the first question. Les, who is actually in Humanists International? How do they organise who does the report for each country, and do you know how it came to let people or assign people to do the report for Australia?
Yeah, I don't know much about what happens behind the scenes. What I do know with Australia is Humanist Australia helped out with the update. And Marianne Cosgrove, who is the CEO of Humanist Australia, she says she was contacted for some information. I know Marianne had some involvement. Whether there were others, I don't know. But in the report, they do make the point that they would like to give a more detailed analysis on each of the countries, but their capacity is limited. And in the report, they invite people that if you can add to the report, add detail to the report, add detail in areas they don't know anything about, areas of discrimination or persecution that is not included in the report for that country at all, please contact them. So they're explicitly requesting assistance with the updating of the report. So certainly if you can help, please contact Humanists International, because they've got very, very limited resources. It's amazing how much they get done and the quality of the report. I mean, it really is a high quality report. I'm quite impressed by it.
Questions from the audience?
Thank you very much, Les. I'm thinking about the broader historical context of freedom of thought. In the modern era, it was particularly a product of the British civilization. I mean, in the 19th century, you had freedom of thought in the Anglo-Saxon countries, but on continental Europe, you still had secret police making sure everybody was doing the right thing. But historically, public freedom of thought seems to have originated with the Protestant Revolution. And essentially, a lot of the modern thought came from people who were deeply religious, these nonconformists who insisted they had a right to their own conscience, and it wasn't up to the Protestant governments to dictate to them how to think. Now, my point here, where do you see the context for freedom of thought now? How is it different now? Is there a different basis for that context?
Yeah, good question, Steve, because up until the very modern era, when you think of John Locke arguing for freedom of religious thought, but he didn't allow it to Catholics, though, because Catholics were considered seditious. He thought that Catholics wanted to overthrow the Protestant government, so they were seditious. So everyone else could have freedom of thought. I can't remember about atheists, though, with John Locke. So certainly up until the modern era, much of it was about the Catholics suppressing the Albigensians and the Waldensians and the Gnostics, and of course the Protestants, and then the Protestants suppressing the Catholics. Had the 100-Year War, and then after that the 30-Year War. So as earlier, it was in the context of, I'm a religious person, I want to decide what religion I am and how I practice it. And then with the rise of free thought and atheism, well, it started off with the rise of deism, because the earliest free thinkers in the modern sense were not atheists, because it was dangerous. Through the Enlightenment, it was literally very dangerous to class yourself as an atheist. So the David Humes and the Voltaires, they described themselves as deists, but other people smelled a dirty rat here, and they called Voltaire, people like Voltaire and David Hume, atheists, which I'm guessing they were, but as I said, it was very dangerous at that time, and we see even in 2024 in many countries it's still dangerous to call yourself or identify as an atheist. So that was the earlier context up to the modern era, and then of course with the rise of secularism, atheism, humanism, the secular ethical societies, especially after the war from the 1950s, where we see this quite a rapid decline in religious belief. Then a new type of freedom was started to be fought for in an important way, and that's the freedom of atheists, secularists, humanists, skeptics. So I think that's how it's changed since the Second World War. It's not just religious belief that is entitled for people to be free to believe whatever religion that they want. It's everyone ought to be entitled to believe without hindrance whatever worldview they want to accept, whether it's religious or non-religious. So I think that's the new context from after the Second World War. David, you have a question or comment?
Well, frankly, I'm concerned about the growth of Islam in Australia. I'm not concerned about the growth of any other religion in Australia. And I think if you look at the experience in Europe, it's Islam that should be the cause of concern, not any other religion. I don't hear of Buddhists being a problem in Denmark or Sweden.
Yeah, well, I suppose one alarming thing is just in the last few weeks, these very young radicalized Muslims going on a rampage with knives. Even that said, well, I'm really pleased to see that the religious communities, the Islamic religious communities, I see them on the news, the leaders coming out and saying, this has got nothing to do with religion, which I think is not right. But what I am pleased about is them disassociating those much more moderate Muslims with the young, 16 and 14-year-olds who are out stabbing people. So I think that's a good sign. So I think the Islamic communities here in Australia, my impression is they're quite moderate.
Yeah.
The Islam we need to worry about is the Islam in Pakistan and Hezbollah
that's easy to say, but the European experience is as the portion of Muslims in the country rise, it becomes more difficult for non-Muslims.
Well, my worry is, so I think what is a good thing is that all of us individually and as a group criticise Islam as we ought to criticise all of the nutty religions. So do that as individuals. What I am saying is the options for the Australian government, other than fixing up the problems we do have with the chaplaincy program, private religious schools, the privileges that religious organisations have in terms of paying tax and governance requirements. Quite a few things we can do to fix up the inadequate separation of church and state. There's things we can do, but I don't see much of a role for the government in trying to reduce the propensity of Islamic belief, because I don't think that's the way to go. I mean, I'm all for freedom of religion. I'm all for freedom of conscience to the extent that it's not harming other people.
I'd like to make a comment on that theme. There is something we can do, and that is to stop funding religious schools, because all that does is justify and authenticate all of these religious beliefs. And it's actually not true to say that Islamic violence has got nothing to do with Islam. It does. And all of the violence perpetrated by Islamic State was all justified by quotes from the Quran. So if the Imam's saying that it's got nothing to do with Islam, perhaps he hasn't read the Quran. So, okay, everyone's entitled to their religion, but what we're doing in Australia, almost more than any other country, is fostering and propagating these religions at taxpayers' expense.
Mm.
It's just, we do it more than any other country. And Les said what an anomaly it is. And another question Les raised was, are we going forwards or backwards? And since Federation, and I think it's a kind of a contradiction. In some ways, we have gone backwards, because at Federation, we didn't fund any religious schools. And then it started out with funding school buildings, and then Whitlam came in and funded Catholic schools, and then it's gone up and up and up since then. So the role that religions play and the degree to which they're supported has gone up so much since Federation. So, and it's still there, still going up. So in that sense, we're getting worse. And the contradiction is that people are losing their religion. The number of religious people is going down, and yet the power of religion is going up. So it's hard to work out where that's going to end up. Okay, I think we're going to wrap it up now. Just an announcement about next month. We've got a speaker from the Burmese Atheists. Hasn't given a talk before. Hein, and he's living in Brisbane, and he's talking about the subject of Buddhism. So can't remember the exact title, but that will be something to look forward to for next month. Atheist Society website is just a repository of so much information over so many lectures over so many years that it really is a treasure trove. So thank you everyone for their contribution. And thank you very much for tonight, Les, and see you next month. Once again, let's thank Les.